On to question 3. Explain why the Fed can always decrease the money supply, but cannot always increase the money supply. What are the implications for macroeconomic policymakers? In our junior tutor, I said a decreased money supply will increase the real interest rate. So even though a lower money supply may reduce output growth, its policy action can be taken. However, an increase in the money supply will reduce the real interest rate, but there's a lower limit of 0, where the nominal interest rate is equal to the inflation rate. There's a lower limit of 0, where the nominal interest rate is equal to the inflation rate, below which the real interest rate cannot fall. If the Fed increases the money supply at a time when it will result in a negative real interest rate, policy is not feasible because a negative real interest rate will create a disincentive to save money. Therefore, the lower bound 0 acts as a constraint to increasing the money supply. This means that the economy will fall into a liquidity trap where the money supply is increased by a high amount, and therefore policymakers need to ensure that any increase in money supply does not keep the real interest rate near 0. So here we need to draw the money market graph. We've got the interest rate here and the quantity of money here. I will Google that and make sure that these axes are labeled correctly after. Got money demand and money supply should be a vertical line. Wow, close for sure. So we got the interest rate on the y-axis. Cool, I got it. So here, obviously, we're going to have, when it's at equilibrium, Q star, quantity supplied equals the quantity demanded of money. And we're going to have I star, which is the equilibrium nominal interest rate. So we can always decrease the money supply. Actually, let me make this bigger. I'm going to redraw the graph. So again, bear with me. With the quantity of money on x-axis, nominal interest rate on the y-axis. We've got, say, money demand curve and our money supply curve. And of course, we've got our equilibrium interest rate and our equilibrium quantity. Now, what happens when we decrease the money supply? That means we move this line to the left and the interest rate goes up. There is no effective limit, although I'm sure there are some practical implications that act as a limit, but hypothetically, we can keep reducing the money supply, and the interest rate would keep rising and rising until, say, we reduce the money supply to 0 or something nonsensical like that. That won't happen. So the money supply can always be reduced because the interest rate can always go up. However, the money supply cannot always be increased because if we move it too far to the right, if we introduce too much money into the economy, call this MS prime, then we can reach a point where the money supply curve and money demand curve no longer intersect. So at this point here, the interest rate is already 0. And at this point, moving the money supply any further to the right has no further effect on the interest rate. So this point here is when we enter what is called a liquidity trap. Our junior tutor did an excellent explanation of this, so I'll go back over it in a second. So in case we'll call it, this means that the economy will fall into a liquidity trap when the money supply is increased by a high amount, and therefore policymakers need to ensure that any increase in money supply does not keep the real interest rate near zero. So again, once we move it too far to the right, once we increase the money supply too much, we reach a point where increasing it any further makes no changes to the interest rate, and we find ourselves in a liquidity trap. Moving on.